Last night I was able to see Avatar Fire and Ash, and as someone who absolutely adores The Way of Water, I'm sad to say I think this is the weakest film in the franchise, and it's not close. I want to start by praising these movies in a way that may also serve as a warning, because I like the first film, I love the second film, I am someone who has defended this franchise pretty hard. I also have a great deal of respect for James Cameron, one of the most influential and innovative directors in the history of Hollywood. Something I've talked about a lot is stan culture, how unhealthy that is. Just because I love the second movie and like the first, and I've argued for these movies, I've gone to bat for them, does not mean I'm just going to automatically tell you this thing is good, because it really is not, in my opinion. To be honest, in a word, I think Fire and Ash is inoffensive. I think this is a movie that is desperately trying to be as palatable to general audiences as possible. It takes the safe route every single time. Everything is sort of dumbed down and oversimplified. This is about as bare bones as one of these movies could be. I'll be honest, I have a bone to pick with this movie, who introduces a large new threat here through the Mon Quan, who are the Ash people led by Varang. Honestly, I find what we get from this tribe to be incredibly ironic given the entire point of Avatar. They are about as dumbed down as it could possibly get. They are obsessed with fire, with guns, with violence. They are very simple. They seem to be barely sentient. Literally engage in their own version of scalping, and I think if you're going to introduce a group of the Na'vi people that are this simplified, this tropey, you have better be willing to flesh out why they are the way they are. Through Varang, the film dabbles in this, but it never truly commits, despite the film being 3 hours and 20 minutes long. We get this idea that they have a problem with Eywa herself. They have a lack of faith, and that lack of faith has driven them away from the kind of nature-centered viewpoint of the other tribes. Essentially, the area they lived in was burned out and destroyed. They felt that Eywa abandoned them. They were starving. They had nothing, so they basically turned to these cult-like practices to cope, and they turned their back on their god. That could be interesting if you were willing to dive deep on the differences, really get into the intricacies of what makes these three tribes we've seen so far different, especially around the idea of faith. That could be a riveting film. We essentially see this tribe used as a pawn by Quaritch and the Sky People to use in their war against Jake and his friends. There are some interesting developments here for Quaritch with these people, who kind of see him as a kindred spirit, as he is very war-centered. They are warmongering as well, and they kind of bond over that. He develops some feelings for one of them as well. Multiple opportunities in this film for them to do something really interesting with this character, to have him make a turn here or there, or have him do something that kind of shocks the system, and every single time it takes the straight and narrow, the least interesting path available. We'll say there's also a lot of work done in this film with his son Spider, played by Jake Champion. We'll say I've already seen this guy kind of getting skewered by the internet. I do not think a lot of that is fair. I think the writing for his character, the dialogue, is atrocious with a lot of the kids in general, and that's no exception for him. I actually sort of like this character. I like his performance. He brings a lot of joy and wonder. I think he's kind of a stand-in for the audience, kind of taking this all in, and he goes through a lot in this film. I like a lot of the work done with him. I really like the character of Loak, who is your narrator for this film. I think he gets a lot of really good development. I think his relationship with his father, Jake Sully, is the most interesting thing this film has going. I think it was one of the highlights of The Way of Water as well. I think Neytiri is fine in this film. I don't think she gets that much to do. There are some challenges in the relationship between her and Jake. Despite how long this film is, so many of these things feel just underbaked, like the Wind people or the Ash people, or some of the dynamics between characters here. I also have to say, one of the most important characters in this film is Kiri, who is being played by Sigourney Weaver. Sigourney does the voice. Something about this is shockingly uncanny. It really struck me in this film, and they do something with this character romantically that I think makes it a lot weirder. It does not feel right. I have to say, I think this character is interesting as this sort of Na'vi Jesus. That basically is what her character is, with this immaculate conception, etc. She kind of has the power in this film to Deus Ex Machina out of anything. Any situation that pops up, she's able to kind of plug into the Matrix and just fix stuff. It gets repetitive. It is rinse and repeat. And rinse and repeat is a phrase that can be used against this film freely. We are seeing a lot of the same tropes and story beats we've seen already in the first two films, and I think as you push this forward, it has to feel fresh, which is one of the reasons I loved Way of Water, because it introduced so much more, but we're seeing a lot of that stuff kind of recycled here. The film also just has, to me, huge objective problems. Like, I think the dialogue is bad. I think this script is really suffering a lot of the times, especially with the kids. I think there are some crazy editing choices here. There are cuts that do not work. There are cuts that also just skip large portions of the story. There's a sequence where, you know, some of our characters are kind of in a bad spot, and then it just cuts to them being out of that situation when it seemingly was impossible for them to get away. That is a cardinal sin, I think, when it comes to filmmaking. I also have to say, in this story, there's way too much plot armor. I think the main characters here are just kept far too safe. I think this is this massive, incredibly dangerous war where they really are up against the odds, and people just kind of survive over and over again in situations where they really should be dying. I'm not looking for realism in Avatar movies, obviously, but there should be some cost of this war. It's honestly honestly feels like the film with the least cost thus far. There are a lot of other problems with this film. I think it is exposition heavy. I think it is repetitive. I think they simply bit off here more than they could chew. I honestly think the most interesting conversation to come out of this film is what they did to these people, because they really kind of set the Na'vi back with this portrayal. It is a strange choice. Just to say, I really enjoy this world. I like a lot of the characters. I didn't mind sitting there and watching this film, but I am not saying you need to rush out and see this. Truly, I think, there might be people out there who love the first two films like me who are not going to like this because they've already seen a lot of what is done here. What I am going to say here is watch at your own risk, lower your expectations, and I think you might have a better time than if you go in with your expectations way up here.